Okay, we'll call the City Council joint work session with the Harbor Commission on July 5th, 2023 at noon. To order, roll call please.
Mayor Ellison.
Here.
Tom Baylor.
Here.
Kathy Sherman.
Yes.
Casey Kinsman.
Here.
Ann Schaefer.
Here.
Kristen Carpenter.
Here.
Ken Jones.
Here.
And the Harbor Commission, Andy Craig.
Here.
Mike Babick is absent. Max Weiss.
Here.
Ken Jones.
Here.
Krista Huber.
Here.
Tommy Sheridan.
Here.
And Kate Laird.
Here.
Quorum of both bodies.
All right, our work session topic today is plans for additional harbor improvements. Who's heading this thing up?
You're heading it up. And you started.
Well, what are our plans? What's the Harbor Commission's latest?
The Harbor Commission's latest, we are moving forward with our project, replacing the South Harbor. And we are all here, I think, to talk about, I know we were looking at there's the Forest Service lease that is in front of you guys regularly, and that kind of is part of our discussions about long-term plans for that portion of the harbor. We have looked at different ways of, discussed different ways of trying to incorporate a net float into the plan for harbor improvements going forward. We have help me with the language there, Kevin.
The grant application?
The grant application is for the infrastructure.
The PIDP?
PIDP, Port Infrastructure Development Plan. So that includes a lot of improvements to that side of the harbor that would reimagine that whole area over there. And so, and I don't know any specific things. I know one thing that we had talked about, I don't know that we're still, we had talked about trying to reuse part of the South Harbor as maybe a net float. I don't know that there's,
I think
the airplane float had been discussed, other parts of the other harbor have been discussed, but I mean, it's difficult to make a.
I think at our last meeting, Helen, didn't you say you had some information on the current airplane float?
So in 2016, there was an engineering study done in the harbor. It was used to support our rationale for getting a new harbor. The page that Kevin is distributing to you in the middle section there, this is taken from that 2016 report. It is the condition assessment of the airplane, the net mending, airplane float, excuse me, airplane float. It gets called so many things. As of 2016, obviously, we are now 7 years later. So, and if you'll note on the form, the report, it basically says it's in a state of deterioration. So that is the basis for replacing much of the harbor. The contract that we've signed with the folks that are building the harbor basically says every single piece of the harbor is going to be removed and nothing will be salvaged and everything will be taken to the landfill. Is that right, Kevin? Yes.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
And it's based on the fact that most of the materials, while some of them may be salvageable as a whole, it's deemed to be not salvageable and not worth the effort to try to, it'd be cost prohibitive to try to salvage and create spaces and everything. And the contractors said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to get rid of everything based on.
Also the legal and environmental concerns related to people wanting to tow them off into who knows which inlets, and then they break loose, cause trouble, and then that gets tied back to us because we allowed that to happen.
Yeah. So we basically have drawn a line and did sign a contract with Turnigan Marine that says that we will dispose of all parts and pieces. That does not preclude us from pursuing a net bending float or an airplane float in the future. And I believe that seems to be a priority of the users in the community. And it's something that we should pursue and seek funding for. I also want to get back to the PIDP grant application, and there was some concern that the plans that you all had looked at perhaps were adjusted slightly for the PIDP grant. Every grant has very specific criteria and things that they're looking to fund. And the grant application that we submitted was targeted to gain the maximum points through a review process and eliminate any things that would be detractors from the grant application that we submitted. The airplane float, the net bending float was one of those detractors. It didn't meet the intent of the grant, so it was removed. It was not removed from the plan, it was removed from the grant. And I just want to be really clear about that. In every instance, we have to match what we're trying to accomplish with what the grant is going to award. And so at any point in time, if there are things that are priorities of the Harbor Commission or the community at large, and we can go and seek funding that meets both the criteria and accomplishes what we want to do. So again, I just wanted to be really clear about that, because the PID grant application did not have that particular component in it because it wasn't a qualifying component. And it's still valuable and important, and it's still something that we should pursue. So go from there.
And just to add on to that, I mean, the reason I included it in the original, I guess, if you want to call it the first design, was because, there is sometimes that even if something doesn't meet the grant requirements, you can still, slip it in there and see if you can get the funding for it. But when we finally got the cost estimates back for it, because the city was not providing any match, that was already going to take away from us. So then we had to look at project components, figure out what the different costs were, how can we bring those down, which of those components not only costs a lot of money, but then also scored us lower. And so that was one of the reasons that the net bending float and that whole area kind of got reworked.
And just for that grant application. So I just want to be really clear that that grant application, a modified design got submitted because it was more competitive, but that in no means downgrades the importance that you as the Harbor Commission are placing on those components that you would like to see built at some point when the funding becomes available. And then the only other thing I want to kind of remind everybody, sadly, our $32 million harbor project, as originally scoped and budgeted, obviously it came in a shitload higher. So the lowest bid was $46 million, I think, and we have had to remove component parts and pieces that were valued by this body, valued by the users, just to get to a budget number that we could meet and fund. That budget number includes a almost $4 million contribution that the city council made to the project in addition to the funds that had already been raised. Their hope was that those funds would be replaced, and staff has applied for a grant for the Denali Commission to the tune of $2 million. We should know in the next month or so whether that's funded or not. That still leaves us hanging out there with $2 million that the city has committed directly, and again wants to see replaced. So we are continuing to seek funds just for the core South Harbor infrastructure improvements, and that is a commitment and a burden on staff right at the moment, on the community actually as a whole. But the project, if we were fully funded, would have much more than it has now. But the key component parts, the replacing of existing infrastructure, is maintained with a $39 million commitment. So that's where we be. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the first consensus we need, I think, is probably the current airplane net float. Is it consensus then that we're not gonna worry about that anymore, send it to the dump, and we'll focus on keeping it in the plan to replace that with something new later on? Or is there still thoughts that current dock might be valuable at some point in time?
I don't think it's healed itself since the 2016.
Yeah.
My observations. I think we're all good with that. I'll turn to Kenny. I think you're the only one who has reserves that we might be able to save that structure.
I think it can be rebuilt. We had, after this, we had a cost estimate come back of $340,000 to rebuild that. You reusing the concrete floats, all new whalers, the parts that were failing get replaced. And that was back in 2017 $340, so 2023 probably like 800,000 or something. We haven't had an updated cost estimate. The topic hasn't really even gained, I guess, much traction at the council or staff level in order to direct that sort of assessment to be done. So we really don't know what the cost would be, and that's kind of what I was pushing for, is why don't we just ask one of these contractors what they think it would cost while they're here. And maybe we still take to the dump, but let's stack it off to the side instead of just piling it in the pile with all the rest of them, because those concrete floats can still be reused. Those are still good. If you look at the assessment, it says they're, minor to moderate damage rating, and there's some isolated areas with some cracks, but it's the wood whalers that were failing, that have failed. The concrete float itself is actually still usable. So,
It is soaking up water, and has been for 35 years or something like that. So that's rebuilding the other parts of the harbor. We would find the wood, the hardware, and we're also fighting that the whole thing was sinking, so getting less and less. So that one has, I don't know, what would you say, 30, 40 of the leftover foam billets from the North Harbor that I
Yeah.
put underneath it
For
to
flotation, yeah.
help keep it floating. So, yeah, it's possible that the foam in the concrete still has, some life in it, but it only is sitting the way it is because of everything underneath it pushing up. It's new stuff underneath it, not its original. But I think we'd be better off spent on a designed new construction. Even to spend the money to figure out how much it would cost to rebuild it, because it's just.
and yeah, I guess I'd be fine to let it go as long as I could get some sort of consensus from everybody that's going to be involved over the next few years that it's a priority to get replaced. My big thing is the fleet. It's not just me, it's the fleet that's concerned about this. CDFU has written letters, they represent the majority of the fleet. And people in the harbor are concerned with losing access to a place to mend their nets. The same fleet primarily, they can't pull it out in front of their fingers like a gill liner can. So, one of the many hats that I wear is CDFU SANE rep, so maybe that's why I'm championing this a little bit harder than some other people, because I get all the phone calls to me from individual fleet members. And yeah, it's not going to be a good thing. But if we have to go a couple years without it, that's fine. I just don't want to see us go 20. That's especially when maybe rebuilding this one isn't the best solution. Sounds like it's too late to consider it. We've already signed a contract to dispose of it. Okay. Well, you had brought up a really good alternative. What about getting a floating barge or something?
Yeah,
put it
like
there.
boats or something like
Yeah,
that.
there's other alternatives, and after you know, this joint body hasn't met since March of 2020, so I kind of wish that maybe we could make it an annual thing where Harbor Commission and City Council meet, but preferably do it when the fleet's in town, to talk about these types of things. But, you know, there was a draft spend plan that came down the pike for the 2018-2020 Sockeye, Chum, and Chinook disaster funding. And it's now in its second draft, and the comment period, I believe, just ended for that. But communities are allocated $1 million. And I was reading through the qualifying criteria on, you know, what a community has to do to qualify, and for that one, I think Cordova's gonna end up with the lion's share of that $1 million. It's not gonna get it all. Whittier qualifies, Kenai might qualify, Valdez qualifies, Seward probably qualifies for a little bit, but it's all based on how much, you know, fish gets landed in the community. And so I would assume, maybe it's not safe to assume, but if we take the 2016 disaster as an example, Cordova's, you know, got the majority, 60–70% of the community allocation for that pink salmon disaster. So, you know, I think that we have some funding coming that has to be tied to something fleet related. There's a lot of strings attached with that funding. And I know the 2016 disaster funding is going into the South Harbor. We were gonna rebuild the 3-stage and do the Crater Lake Water Project. Those funds got diverted when we got the cost estimates back. And I agreed with that and still do, that, you know, that was a good use of those 2016 disaster funds. I think that a net bending / airplane float, you know, replacement for the existing one, paired with possibly a tier 2, use the disaster funds as the match and try to get a tier 2 from the state. That might give us the funds needed for a new one. You know, it's an opportunity to look into anyway. We also have the 2020 Pink and Coho disaster. That draft spend plan hasn't even been announced yet, but it will have a community component as well. So there's, between the two of them, I'm expecting this city of Cordova to receive $1 million. So,
Do you think we should focus on the net mending? The airplanes, we can take care of the airplanes. We've talked to the pilots. We can use regular slips with little things that we can tow in and out for the winter. It's only a short period of time that they need slips. And that one down there, the existing one, that airplane slips are a pain in the butt for the net menders. That's a whole bunch of space that, and it's causing deterioration because the way they are built is not as strong as it would be. But I don't know if we need it for funding to say that it'll help with the airplanes. I don't know.
well, I think for the PIDP application, it would have helped had we included it as a multi-purpose float, because it's all about transport of goods, and having a seaplane port in the harbor is a mode of transportation that was left out. And if the, you know, when we were looking at it this spring, we left that out. We focused just on net mending, and then it was deemed as a detractor. So if we are not successful with the PIDP grant application this year, which obviously I hope we still are, that might be something to consider for next year's application, is having the seaplane portion back in, because there are quite a few goods, or at least there used to be, quite a few goods transported out to the hatcheries from Cordova via seaplane in our harbor. So, but yeah, if we don't want to utilize any PADP funds and just go after the tier 2 with the disaster funding as the match, then maybe a smaller,
Keeps it really simple.
just net bending float is the right approach. The one thing that I would like to see us talk about, and I know we talked about it at the last Harbor Commission meeting, is a little bit of a consensus on the location. We've looked at 3 or 4 different locations over the years now. It's all kind of come down to the best spot is where the Forest Service float currently is. That's
With dredging. Because it's not.
Yeah, that was, you know, part of the conversation, but I think that it could be fit in there without dredging. I mean, it was a -3 this morning, and I drove by it, and it could very easily fit a net bending float in there. Might not be at the same angle, but
Yes.
So I guess I think what I'm hearing, unless other folks on the Harbor Commission disagree, is that there is support. I mean, we've always said we support an amending float. I think that's been from what I remembered at our council meetings, nobody has disagreed with that. So we, I think, agree on the value of having a place for net mending in the harbor. I'm not, so I guess I won't be asking like to anybody disagree with that. Maybe we can pin that one down for the record. The disaster relief money, I think what we just heard the city manager say is we don't have enough to pay for the South Harbor rebuild as it is. The city's committed to $4 million. We might get 2 of it from the Denali Commission. We probably need more. So I don't wanna kind of earmark where money goes. I think we establish priorities and say this is kind of how we would list our priorities for harbor infrastructure, and ask for staff to recommend to us how to kind of match up funding with needs. And as far as today goes, yes, I want to talk about the net mending float. I would like to talk about the Forest Service lease, and I would like to talk about the fuel dock. So that was kind of the points I wanted to cover coming in here.
I think we've got nailed down that we're not gonna worry about the current airplane dock. I think that's off the table at this point in time. Didn't sound like anybody was gonna die on their sword for that. I would agree with Kristen that I think we all agree that the net mending float, airplane float, whatever we wanna call it, is a priority. But funding needs to be found, whether that's disaster funds or another grant or whatever. So I think we've got those 2 nailed down. But we do need to nail down what everybody's thoughts are on the Forest Service lease. If any of you were paying attention to the last council meeting, that was pretty split, and it didn't go anywhere, and I believe it's on our agenda to discuss again. So we would like council would like the Harbor Commission's feelings on that particular lease, and in particular some of the qualifications in there, the 16-month rate out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you get to a point of discussion, I would like for Kevin to articulate what the lease says, the proposed lease says, so that everyone's operating from the same place.
If I could just ask one more question, I just wanted, I thought, great, we're all sitting down with the Harbor Commission. At one of our meetings, we talked about, we've talked about this twice at council meetings, but we talked about the resolution that the Harbor Commission adopted in March. And it says, now therefore be it resolved that the Harbor Commission of the City of Cordova, Alaska recommends City Council approve a U.S. Forest Service lease with the 16-month termination clause. And at one point, I think it was represented that that's not what the Harbor Commission wanted, and I wanted to know if you still stand by that resolution.
Well, everybody that's here, we are, I think, in agreement that section of the harbor, when it gets rebuilt, we can't have that little one float for a couple trailer boats sticking out in the middle of a very important part there. So, however, 16 months gives us plenty of time for this, the way funding cycles work and different things like that. We'll know, and they're not. That's why we passed that we wanted the 16, but we didn't want 5 years. We wanted a short time period that they would have to vacate. We'd probably be able to give them plenty more than 16 months notice. But is that the way you remember it, Kenny? I remember.
Well, we didn't actually get to see
discussed
the
it.
lease this time. Back in 2017, when we originally discussed this, we actually got to review a draft lease. But there's been multiple resolutions throughout the years, dating back all the way to 2015, when we first asked for a 3 to 5 year term, no longer than a 3 to 5 year term, because it was coming up for renewal in 2020. So we kind of gave Will an advance notice. Then we, again in 2020, said no more than 5 years. And then I believe March of last year, we put in a resolution saying no more than 5 years. And then finally in March of this year, it was whatever length lease, make sure it has a 16-month out. So the general, I guess, consensus has always been short term. And I believe that what Councilmember Carpenter was stating earlier about how it was represented, that's not what the Harbor Commission supported. That's a little bit of a misrepresentation of what I said. I said that they wanted a 16-month clause. They did not support a 20-year lease, and I've never supported a 20-year lease. We never talked about 20 years. We were not given the terms of the lease to review. We were just told that there's going to be a clause, so we made a resolution supporting the clause. So it had 20 years, I believe, in the draft resolution, and we stripped it out because we did not support. Or maybe it was lease as written, but we didn't get a chance to review the lease, so we stripped that out of our resolution. Maybe that's what it was.
Certainly the lease.
It was very clear among all of us that we want that science center, Forest Service area needs to be dredged. That is a very important part of our harbor that's underutilized, and we're gonna.
Yeah, long term, that is.
That is our plan.
Just like it's not in the grant, but it's part of the plan, eventually when we get there. Helen, you had?
I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that the lease itself is a document that was negotiated based on feedback from all of you, and that 16-month clause is in there. The length of the lease was in no way meant to snub anybody, because the 16-month out is really, it's a 16-month lease that just goes on and on and on, up to 20 years. Right now, we're not collecting any revenue at all from the Forest Service. So in the interim period, we feel like we can at least collect rent for the next 16 months, possibly longer. But I also want to alert you that, how many months have we been working on the lease? When you're creating leases with the federal government, it's a very long and onerous process, I can assure you. Legal, back and forth. And they did make the concession to a 16-month lease, out clause, which is not something they wanted. But they wanted a longer-term lease, and quite frankly, after going back and forth as long as we did too. It's like if we had to redo this in 5 years because we didn't get the funding, or we didn't have the right, whatever, I think some of us would probably run screaming and quit our jobs. But
And we always intended to have slips for the Forest Service. We were never gonna kick them out of the harbor.
Right, yeah, and
They're just trailer boats that
yeah,
go longer than.
And I think there's a real acknowledgement, and that's the reason for the 16-month lease. The Forest Service is on notice that you can stay in that until we give you notice, and then you're gonna be moving somewhere. And they got that message loud and clear through, and I'll have Kevin reiterate the conversations with the Forest Service. So it's not a local decision. The local management wants a particular solution, but we negotiate with a legal team that's based out of wherever, Timbuktu, Virginia, Portland, okay. And it was, they drive the solution based on what our needs were. So at no point were we negotiating with local management, we were negotiating with the legal team.
Councilmember Baylor, you had?
Yeah, I guess, I'd like a little more clear, definitive answer from the Harbor Commission. I understand the want for the 5-year lease, and I think that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was a discussion before anybody knew about this 16-month clause. And I would agree, I would not want to go out at least 5 years without any clause in there like we have. But once that clause was in there, then it's like, it's a 16-month lease. I mean, if we get funding next year, somehow, the 16 months they're gone. If not, if this goes 10 years or whatever, we're getting $10,000 a year plus CPI. So I'm not, I think the harbor gets what they want. If they come up with a plan, and by the way, the Harbor Commission sets the priorities, council doesn't, what the harbor wants. So you guys come to us and say, this is what we want to stress and we want to do. So I look at this, I talk with other people in the harbor, and I explain to them, I go 20-year lease, and they go, oh, I don't want to do that. I said, yeah, but there's a 16-month clause there if we get funding in. Oh, well, then that's great. So I don't know if there's still an objection to that now that you did say 5 years, but you said that was before I think anybody knew about the 16 months. So now that we have a 16 months, do you support the 20-year long-term contract at $10,000 a year plus CPI with the 16-month lease? Is it a yes or no for you guys? And that would help us tremendously.
Can we go around the table from the Harbor Commission?
That would be helpful.
Start with Andy.
How about we start with Krista? She's over here.
I mean, if you're looking for a yes or no, I have to think for more than 5 seconds, but I don't like a 20-year lease.
Even with the 16-month.
I appreciate the 16-month, and it makes me feel more comfortable, but when we're saying we have a 20-year lease, do we have a 20-year lease or do we have a 16-month lease? Those, that, to me, it's a little bit different, but I'm not gonna fall on my sword over it. The 16-month lease, I think, accomplishes what I understand the commission wants, and it does make me feel comfortable, but I don't like a 20-year lease for anybody in the harbor.
Well said. I agree. I guess our fear, I would say collectively maybe, is that it's the toehold that will prevent things from happening, and I mean, they can affect funding for these federal projects more than any individual of us can. So how do we make sure that 16-month out is really believed and not just like a push it aside kind of thing? It is, but as far as it goes, if that's actually 16 months, they'll leave without, pinching the funding and making it stop, then I don't really care the length of the term. But shorter, better.
Can you answer that question?
Yeah. It's a legal document. It's been negotiated between legal teams, and it's a very solid and very, very enforceable document. So I don't think there could possibly be any worry. And about the funding business, every agency, federal agency, is its own thing. We have more clout through our delegation than the local Forest Service would have to disarm us from getting a grant of any kind or another. So that is never even really has crossed my mind. Just understanding how the agencies work. The power comes from the entities that's applying. They go through a review process internally. There's no influence whatsoever, unlike MERI grants or any of the Harbor Commission grants. So I would be surprised, more than surprised. I would be shocked if that was the case. And it is not my experience in the least, and I've been doing this a long time. So.
With that, I don't have any concerns. Something that I heard in the discussion earlier was if in 5 years staff are forced to renegotiate a lease, that's time that I believe could be better spent on fund development and looking for grants. So with that description, I don't have any concerns.
Are there any penalties for going for the 16 months? Like, is there anything in the lease that would penalize the town for?
No. I mean, right now we're getting nothing. So the only, Kevin, you want to speak to that, answer the question about any penalties in the lease document?
For saying, okay, 16 months, you're out of here. Like, or is there anything attached to that?
That
or
penalizes us?
Yeah.
No.
It's a straight, clean thing, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the negotiations you had with the feds. And again, this is with the legal team that drafts the documents, and then it went back and forth between our legal team. So it's a very, very tight and solid document.
Yeah, I mean, it went so far as, they have a specific lease negotiating team that is out of Portland that I was working with, and they were so against that clause at all, that we actually escalated it up to the Counselor General, like, for the federal government. And we actually spoke directly with their legal team, which is not a standard thing, and we pretty much let them know, you know, this is our harbor, we're not telling you that you can't be here, but you're also not gonna tell us how we're going to handle our harbor. And we made that pretty clear to them, and after that, that's when they realized that we don't have to lease to you at all, and so if you would like to continue staying where you're at, for whether it's short-term or long-term, we are going to require this, and you're going to agree to it. So, I mean, we've made it very clear to them, so,
And they agreed to it,
yeah.
yeah.
Max?
Yeah, that's, well, I was wondering how you got them to agree to that on the, on as far as 10, 20, whatever years it is. If you got that 16 months in there, I don't see there's any problem with it. I mean, 5 years, you're gonna have to renegotiate, and then everything comes back up again. Or 2 years, or whatever you do, if it goes less, every so often, you're gonna be renegotiating one time, and all this stuff can change. So I'm not sure you have longer with that one, even though you're stuck. For 20 years now, they're stuck with that 16 months. They can't talk their way out of it or anything.
And I just wanted to add one more thing, because some people said the cost, how did we get to the 10,000 plus a month? You want to identify to them, share with them how that happened?
Yeah, it was a
10,000 a
mixture.
year.
Year.
A year.
A year, I'm sorry.
That'd be sweet.
That's where
That'd be
sweet. There's more urgency.
Way to go,
Does
you
the harbor get
guys.
the money?
I mean, it is a 10,000% increase, so. Let's just remember that. So, no, so it was a mixture of, we had an assessment done for what, the fair market value is, because technically they're just renting or leasing the tide lens to put their poles in for the dock, and then they are leasing the actual space on the pier for their building. And so we broke it into two parts, where it was the value of the space on the pier plus the cost of what it would cost to be moored in normal slips if you do the bilinear foot for how large their dock is. And so that's where we came to the $10,000.
And so the infrastructure that the Forest Service owns is the building?
The building, their piers, and the actual dock.
Yeah. It's theirs, they built it, they own it, the ramp. So all of that infrastructure is theirs. So they're not leasing that particular stuff, and they're leasing the mud.
That dock they're sitting on too, aren't they?
No. Yeah, the pier itself.
The
the
pier,
pier.
the space on the pier that their building is on.
Or the
Yeah,
pier.
yeah.
And the other part to consider is that we don't have to do maintenance on their property. Their dock is their maintenance problem.
I just wanted to be clear about that, because
Yeah.
there was some concern that we could use those docks, and they're not our docks.
No.
So if you wanted to think about the lease as a 16-month lease with an automatic renewal every month for the next 20 years, that's essentially what it is. Sounds like so. If anybody's concerned about the 20-year thing, you could explain it that way. Anyway, so we got that. Everybody's comfortable with that?
Kate or Ken?
So just clarification, we renew this lease and we find out this fall, October, I think is the earliest we hear back on grants, kind of what I've heard this fall,
September,
sometime this fall.
October is when we're expecting to hear back.
We get funding to give them their eviction notice then. There's no clause saying that you have to wait a certain amount of period from when we sign the lease, we're good.
No, yeah, no, it is.
It's just important to me that I
Yeah.
wanna make sure that we're doing all this work, we're doing all this, and if that's on
No, and they had
them-
wanted that originally, where if they'll give us they'll agree to the 16-month termination clause, but it only activates after, I think they wanted 3 or 5 years, and I told them, no, again, this is our harbor, you will play by our rules.
We don't.
So, but yes, no, they did want that, and I made sure that that was not included. Yeah.
I see that, the other thing, the Forest Service at large isn't here represented. What's concerning to me and what, even hearing some things, is just the lack of interest for them to even future plan on where they could go. And that's just, doesn't seem very responsible to me. They get it figured out if we have 60 months and we're gonna kick them out. It seems like, from what I've heard from the Harbor Commission, there's been talks of, hey, we could have these slips for you to use, there's different options for you guys to use, or reaching out to the state, and just, it doesn't sit well with me. That doesn't, like, to have an entity that doesn't want to have a future plan.
I understand that, and I just want to point this out. I mean,
Sure.
what if you submitted a building permit?
Sure.
And then I said, well, no, why, you don't need to build on that lot, why don't you go build on this lot? You know, that's not what they've applied for. They've applied for the land
Absolutely.
disposal process. Should they be doing other planning? Absolutely. But is that what we're talking about? No.
And they might be.
That's where it comes back to
We
the
don't know.
60-month, that I just want to make sure, knowing the federal plan, for them to move and seek funding to go somewhere else is gonna take longer than 60 months for them to do their thing. I want to make sure that them taking more than 60 months to figure out where they're gonna be at doesn't become our problem, and that now we're sitting at, okay, well, let's have another discussion here and extend them another month, or extend them another month until they can figure out their problem. And that to me is what, yes, they don't have to, and they don't have to disclose what their future plans are, but I want to make sure that their lack of future planning doesn't become our problem. So,
Mayor Olson.
Yeah.
May we finish with the Harbor Commission and then go around the council real quick?
I think we,
Kate hadn't spoken
Yeah,
yet.
I'm, with the clarification of the darn penalties and stuff, I'm okay with the 16-month clause, but I agree with you that it's a big concern of what actually happens when it comes time to pull the pilings.
so I think we've heard from the Harbor Commission.
Except for Ken.
Well,
You want to give it as a council member?
I've talked a lot about this. So the very frustrating part, and, Councilmember Kinsman's right, we sat here at a council meeting a couple weeks ago, and we're told that's not what we're, like what Kevin just said, that's not what we've applied for, so no, we have not looked at anything else. That's very frustrating when the Harbor Commission sat there, pitched alternatives to them, and nope, it's not what we applied for. So that's very frustrating. The 20-year clause gives me heartburn, and I oppose it. I oppose them even renewing a lease at all. This lease has cast a shadow over any planning that the Harbor Commission has done over the last 7 years. Anytime we look at that side of the harbor, it's, oh, well, I try to suggest, well, let's remove this and put something here. Oh, well, Forest Service isn't there, we can't do that. Or, well, what if we fit a floating fuel dock there? Oh, well, it's leased, so, we gotta deal with that lease first before we can even talk about it. And it's very, very frustrating that every time we have a PIDP drawing come back, that Forest Service dock is still right there in the drawing, even though we discussed moving it, it's still there because, oh, that's not a Harbor Commission decision, that's a council decision. You guys can't decide on if you're gonna move it or not. So, I know Councilmember Baylor.
I'm sorry, that is incorrect, and I apologize, point of order, whatever, but in the very first PIDP that I brought to you, I not only ripped the harbor, or the Forest Service out, I ripped that whole pier out that Cam 2 is on. Them being there does not stop me from thinking about the best thing for the community, and if that is what is being said, that is completely wrong, and I disagree with that, because that is not what I showed you guys in the first drawings, and unfortunately, yes, in the second drawings it was then removed back, but it was for other reasons. It wasn't because I'm looking out for the Forest Service, or I care more about them than what the whole community needs, so I just have to say that.
Well, it's not just you, Kevin. This has been going on for years. You came on board about a year ago in this process. And, point of order, I did have the floor, and it was my turn. I waited patiently for the rest of everybody to go around the table, and then I was just interrupted. And so I don't appreciate that. We can go back and read the minutes and look at the YouTube videos if you want, but I'm fairly certain that I'm remembering what was said properly. You can sigh all you want, but this thing has cast a shadow over all the North Harbor planning. We haven't been able to have an open planning discussion over there because of this. And yes, you moved it, but you still had a float there for them. You know, it was, every time we look at how to redesign this North Harbor, it's in there, and it's causing problems for other designs. And you know, we could put a floating fuel dock in without having to do any dredging. But we didn't even get to have that conversation because the lease disposal, when it came to council, it was direct negotiation. It didn't go out for proposals. Shoreside wasn't able to put in a proposal for that lease area because it was just directly negotiated with the Forest Service on a renewal. So, yeah.
Councilmember Carpenter.
Are we shooting to wrap up by 1? I just want to ask her. I don't know if I looked at people. Because I do have another topic I wanted to bring up, but I guess, or actually, you wanted to go around and have council members weigh in.
I can cover all my points in one go.
Okay, I guess maybe, yeah, before I ask my other question, we can all go around.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, this has been really useful. I appreciate the condition report on the seaplane float. And I am in agreement with all the Harbor Commission that we get rid of that and build new and better for you when we find funding for that. I think that's a great idea. Seaplane float fuel dock. I would like to make 2 comments on the Forest Service lease. I do not have any problem with the clause, the 16-month clause, the 20-year lease. I want that $10,000 from them. I think it's fine. It is not being discussed locally because in the Forest Service office about where to move, because that's not the way it works in the Forest Service. It's all in Juneau, the regional office, and in Washington, D.C. And I do know it is being discussed in Juneau with the supervisor's office. So local people in the office here have no say about what happens. So I'm okay with the lease, and I'm gonna vote in favor of it tonight. I would like to have the Harbor Commission, maybe at an upcoming meeting and before budget season, would be, because the ski club's doing this too, and it would be really useful if other commissions do this, but have prioritized needs and wishes, you know, so right now, I know we need a fuel dock, I know we need a seaplane float, I know we need a net mending solution. I don't know what else you need, but that would be great to have, just kind of a prioritized list. There might be other things that I'm a harbor user, but there might be other things that I'm not thinking of. So that would be really useful too as a council person to help plan for the future and plan more as we get further on, like discussing what happens with the north side again. So that would be really useful to me, and that's really all I have to say.
Thank you. Heard from Councilman Schaefer yet?
Yeah, I agree. Having a priority list for the harbor would be good for planning and for budget time. For the Forest Service dock, yeah, with the 16-month clause, I'm in support of it. It's basically a 16-month lease that we don't have to negotiate for 20 years, so I think it's great. And if that lease has been casting a pall over planning of that side of the harbor, like we're dealing with the lease now, and that's what this whole process is about, is dealing with that lease so that we can plan for that part of the harbor. So I'm in support. And I appreciate this meeting. It's been super helpful.
Same, I just, going off of what Ann was just saying, with what's been discussed, the 16-month termination clause, we receive funding this fall. Does anyone on the commission have an issue future planning with or without Forest Service in that space? I just want to make sure that this clause gives you whatever comfort you need and knowing that it's not holding a shadow over future planning in that corner of our harbor. If that makes sense, it is. question. That's where I'm at, that's what I want. I want to make sure as you're moving forward and making plans for that part of our harbor, you have the tools that you need, and that this isn't the toehold, the overshadowing piece that's there, and that you feel comfortable with 16 months, that we'll be able to plan whatever we want in that space, knowing that 16 months is even generous, like, it's gonna, for a lot of times, like, it's gonna take us longer to get funding than 16 months for a project. So that's what I'd like to hear from the commission, if that's appropriate, because that's what I need to know, really, if I'm gonna support this for you guys, if this is something you guys do. Because I'm relying on you guys, and you guys are the subject matter experts on this.
We've all
Yeah, I think we've all said.
said that if there, it's actually 16 months, and, you know, if that is all good.
And I have full confidence that Kevin and his
Sounds
team
like he worked
negotiated
through
it,
it.
and I have no reason not to believe him or his team, so don't give me a
Relating
reason,
to,
Kevin.
yeah, relating to Casey's question. So is the clause enforceable for any reason or no reason? Do we have to give a reason to?
No, I mean, that's the best part, is originally I told them that we just want this for future, you know, rebuilding of the harbor. They ended up accepting wording that we can literally kick them out.
For any reason.
Any reason.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
If you look at the packet with tonight's, I think the wording says for any reason or something like, I mean, it's
So it's-
pretty.
Okay.
Not for cause. It's like, yeah.
We can just choose that we've decided that we no longer want you here.
Okay,
And-
great.
And correct me, it's reciprocal too. They, not, I don't know why
Yeah,
they would leave.
I believe
but
it
they
says,
could leave
I believe
with
it says
16 months
either,
notice.
either party can.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. I just want, okay.
Great.
Thank you, that's what I needed, and I feel good to support this.
Yeah, everything, I think we got some good direction from you guys. In regards to shoreside or the fuel dock, I can't see another company coming in here, putting in, you know, so I'll say shoreside. They know what's available, that's gonna be available, they know the science center's out there, what's gonna happen to that, they know where the Forest Service dock, they know all of that. I have yet to see a conceptual drawing of what they're thinking about doing. And I spoke to the manager here, and he said, well, we want to spend a lot of money. You don't have to spend a lot of money, you give us a conceptual drawing that would help give us some direction. Like if we had something like that, if they were specifically identifying a certain area, that would help us plan. But none of that's come forward, and there's probably reasons for that too. They realize they have to dredge everything. So I think saying that we're eliminating shoreside or eliminating the fuel dock isn't really correct. I don't think anybody's seen any conceptual drawings other than voicing that they would like to be there, and I think it would be a great addition to the harbor. But as you know, there's going to be a lot of other work, dredging and stuff. And then also, not today, but at some point in the future, I hope the Harbor Commission give us some direction on what we're going to do with the Science Center building, what your recommendation in that area is too, because at some point it's going to have to be torn down or reused, and I mean, before it's torn down.
Well, I think that's all part of the bid grant.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? I didn't know.
That's where the fuel dock would go.
Yeah, but there is,
We're planning on
there is,
removing
we have worked with a planner to develop a harbor plan, and Shoreside actually responded to an RFP. They were the only ones that did.
Oh, they did.
For a very specific place in the harbor that was identified through this broad plan, which could have included any number of things. So, and part of it is funding. The cost of dredging is ridiculously expensive, as everyone well knows. The cost of everything is. But Kevin, do you want to just articulate a little bit more? If anyone has any questions about that, but Shoreside was responding to a proposed plan to locate their facility where the Science Center is, and they have developed some planning around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very conceptual, obviously,
Yeah.
because it's at the same level that the PID grant was. Yeah, I mean, we reached out to all of the major fuel providers in the state to see who was interested. Shoreside was literally the only one to even respond to us. And so, yeah.
So did we get that, or I just missed it then?
I missed.
I missed it. All right.
Is it-
That'd be.
So it wasn't
Well,
included
didn't
in
come
the
to-
grant proposal,
Yeah,
right?
it's part
There-
of the, that's
what I thought.
That's the match is.
Yeah, that's where we're,
Investment.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, I knew that, okay.
Yeah, and then last
And-
fall, we did the RFP.
I was gonna say,
so-
yeah, so the 2022 PID, when, at the same meeting where we asked you to approve the concept for, or to approve us to move forward with basically applying for the grant, we also asked you to approve us to do a request for proposals to fuel providers in the state, which is what we did following that. So that's how we came up with Shoreside being the one to be like our partner in the project. And then if I could also just add one thing on about the Science Center. At some point here in the near future, I was hoping to actually come to the council to get some guidance on, right now it is included in the PID to literally just demo it and rip it out. But if there was any interest in us doing our own land disposal and doing a bid where, hell, if you wanna buy it for $1, but you have to move it, then it's not our problem anymore. And just wanted to see what the council's opinion on that is, or do we just leave it as it's gonna get demoed and, you know, so, but again, that's not today's discussion. Unless you want it to be.
So we did agree to an hour, and I know Kristen has some things, but just be mindful of the time, we got 5 minutes.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Thank you. This is not gonna be popular, but I just wonder if anybody else saw the news about what happened in Whittier yesterday with the fuel dock exploding, and if that has given anybody pause. I mean, my first thought was, oh my word, we're talking about setting up the same kind of thing in a really pretty, I mean, not packed, but like it's a concentrated use area. And having an explosion with other boats around, it just really made me think, wow, are we really talking about taking on this risk? And I know it's not popular, I know we've already submitted the grant application. I don't know that we've ever asked Shoreside other things that could be, other improvements that could be done at the ocean dock facility to make that dock more functional for smaller boats.
Because of what happened at Whittier, I would say that is even more reason that it should be moved into the harbor. It's in a more accessible area for fire crews. I mean, you imagine them trying to fight a fire at the ocean dock.
Well, it's
And
down
just
below,
the
it's down below
environmental
guys.
exposure, if things get out and now it's loose out into the inlet, whereas here, if there's leaks, they can easily, you know, buoy off or, you know, off and keep it in the harbor. So if anything, I'd say it's a better reason to have it in
I
the
would
harbor.
agree. And you can containment and everything within the harbor.
The risk of injury to other people.
The spot we're thinking about putting it really keeps it over there on its own. It's not like it's gonna spread to the rest of the harbor. But, you know, we got a lot of gas boats in our harbor, they can be blowing up. I mean, what are you gonna do, you know?
I'm sure they have.
Propane.
Inherent
risk.
risk.
There used to be one or two boats every year blow up.
Yeah.
That was one thing,
Start grading.
like what Kevin just said.
That's
when I-
enough. No more blowing up boats.
When I saw the
Yeah.
news, you know, just like what Kevin said, I was like, man, even more reason why we need to make this happen, because, you know, if something like that happens, we have a multi-billion-dollar industry here, and we lose our fuel dock. I mean, they're not gonna be able to dispense fuel maybe a month, right in the peak of the fishing season. That would cripple our fleets and our canneries and our entire economy. So having 2 docks, you know, while I do appreciate the, you know, loss of life or whatever injury potential of an explosion, I do think that it's isolated. I do think that having, if there's gonna be a spill of water, it's a lot better that it's in the harbor and not out on the mudflats. Not getting washed around the whole inlet. So, yeah, I think that that was my first thought when I saw the news was, man, even more reason why we need one. Because,
Almost designed the same way. Yeah.
well, I think just having the redundancy of having 2
Yes.
docks, like,
That's
Valdez
what
has 2 or 3, you know.
Kohler does too.
Okay. Last thoughts, Harbor Commission?
I got it's a wild card, something you said earlier, Helen, about all of the harbor has to go to the landfill. And it would be on the city to, if something was not used properly. But the city accesses used equipment all the time that no longer makes sense for it to own. And if you had responsible people buying chunks of that harbor and owning it, then I think that there's some some area there. I've had several local businesses that have expressed interest, and including my wife, in owning some pieces, very particular pieces of that, and are willing to buy them.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty, well, back to your original kind of analogy there is like, we sell stuff all the time. We sell beater trucks, and those beater trucks end up back in our possession at some point in time. So we're aware of that risk. But once things go out into the inlet and go abroad, I think that's a really good point, and there's probably a reason we could sell parts and pieces, but I think the contract is much more complicated when we add that level of, okay, well, we want to save this piece and we want to save that part, and they're just like demoing on a timeline, we're getting this stuff out of here. Maybe there's something we could do at the dump, I don't know, I don't want to open up that can of worms either, but you know, there has been discussion about it, and the scales tipped very quickly, to the point where the contract is, we are just demoing everything, we're not gonna be responsible as the contractor, the city won't be responsible either, once the contractor starts working, everything in the harbor is theirs to demo and be responsible for making sure it gets safely and appropriately
Put into our line.
Yeah, well.
Disposed of, yeah. You know, I mean, we've all seen things that happen, you know, it's like, a roof gets redone, there's all this foam, styrofoam, and people pick up parts and pieces of it, and now it's all over town, and it's not maybe being used appropriately, but oftentimes not. We can't be, our legal team has advised us to be very careful about that sort of thing.
I think certainly giving it away, you have the hoarding mentality that will go on, and people will stack it up and it becomes a problem.
But selling it.
But actually selling it with a bill of sale, and this is your responsibility, I think it's a missing opportunity
Yeah.
to just blanket say none.
Yeah.
And to go truck it to the landfill and then truck it back, I guarantee you it's not worth it.
Yeah.
You know, once it's broken to pieces and at the landfill. But if it's already in the water and floating, you just tow it out.
I mean, I'm willing to take a look. I think if Sam were here and others involved, well, no, there's Tony. Tony's giving me these. What? I don't know, we can definitely, I mean, I don't know who would want what parts and pieces. When those guys get to work, they're gonna be just ripping things out, and it needs to be, if someone were to want it, they needed to be able to grab it at that moment in time, get it the hell out of their way, and be, you know, and I don't know how feasible that is, you know.
It's very feasible. The right person with the right tools
With
could
the
have it
right
out
tools,
and out of the
yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And,
Before they even get there.
Before they even
Before
get
they
there.
even get
Yeah.
there.
It could be done.
I certainly hear that argument, and I'd be willing to take a look and see, but, you know, everything I've been told is like, don't you dare open that can of worms, and I appreciate that.
Certainly not for free, because I think that.
That's the point I was saying, because the last one they were giving away, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I saw strings of 4 or 5 being towed around, like, it's free.
Yeah,
And then
somebody
they
with a
realized
skiff
it
had
was-
sort of Samo and said, that's too much. And
Boat won't handle it, it's up on the shore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, any last comments from other Harbor Commission members?
Audience.
Where are you? Anybody in the audience have anything want to add?
Also, one thing, Tony, you want to talk about the relocation plan, just real quick? We have another drawing for vessels. You want to tell them what's going on?
Well, we look like we have more space in the North Harbor if we remove all the finger, well, I shouldn't say all. The finger floats on A float and on one side of B float, and be able to get more vessels in there instead of pulling them all out of the shipyard. So we're gonna do another lottery, a second round lottery on Friday, I think at 9 a.m. here. Just like we did last time, and try to fit some other boats and pick a few extras in there if we can
Looks
fit
like we
more.
may have as many as.
I don't want to say.
Yeah, don't say. Good idea. Don't say.
5? No.
We could have 20 20 or more, so just
Yeah.
letting you know, there's still work.
And where do those finger floats
Just
go?
have to pull them pins out of it.
Yeah, we tried, with Andy, we tried pulling the pins, it was, I think, without the right tools, we got it back in place in 45 minutes. We put them around the backside, we can put them in there, leave them in water.
Councilmember Jones?
So, sorry, which float was that, A and B?
Yeah, the one right below reluctant, and then B is the next one out.
Okay.
Yeah.
They do not capsize.
So, fingers off both sides, the one in front of the reluctant? or-
Yeah, A float, we could do both sides, B float, it's the east side.
So what happens to all the bow pickers that currently park there?
That's the part we will have to move them somewhere, accommodate them one way or another.
Okay.
As you know, that's pretty empty over there in the winter, but there's a few that hang out, so, yeah.
But it's a lot easier to deal with bow pickers than it is to deal with the stingers, so, yeah.
Gents?
How many,
Councilmember?
I guess I just have
Go
a
ahead.
question. How many vessels are in the second lottery?
I don't know the number off the top of my head. It's a
Anyone
bunch.
who wasn't accommodated, plus those that are on the hard, that might have wanted to be in
On the
How many
soft.
were in the first lottery?
a lot.
Oh, my gosh.
We can get you that information.
I honestly don't know off the top of my head, I'll just throw a number there, it's wrong.
It's one of their 30 bucks.
Yeah, they were all common, priority.
Yeah, we.
Okay.
Council? Last comment? See you at 7.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
see you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for coming.
Thank